think we can pretty much start just so that we are on time. So we'll have people trickling in, but hey everyone, welcome to our event on augmented reality, which is called Shaping the Augmented Reality Experience. So my name is Pavan Nandakishore. I'm a data scientist with Colibri, and with me I have the amazing Julia Beabout. She's going to tell us a lot about augmented reality and the experiences that we can have in AR and how do you build those experiences. But before I go there, one of the things that I sort of wanted to talk about is how did this topic come about? Like, why are we talking about this? So if you look out there in the world, some of you may have heard of the Microsoft HoloLens. So recently they released a new platform for it. And there are really interesting tools out there for enterprises to use augmented reality and do some fairly cool things, which is like train their employees, do various activities which might be high risk, but use augmented reality to help in those processes, right? So there are there's Microsoft HoloLens, which is a very interesting headset that does AR. Then there is the Magic Leap headset. Magic Leap is another company that's really coming into augmented reality and virtual reality in a big way. They've been super interesting, but there's also all these amazing sort of consumer level apps on mobile phones, on tablets, where AR is starting to play a good role, like a big role. So this one example is of Apple augmented reality. So if you have an iPad or an iPhone, you can use augmented reality to place furniture. You can, place plants. One of the fun apps that I saw was you can figure out, like in your garden, how various plants look. I mean, this is really touching. So sort of this is touching the tip of the iceberg. This is not even tip of the iceberg in many ways. And another example is Niantic, of course, which is VR gaming, right? I mean, AR gaming, which is a big thing. I mean, Pokémon Go is a big thing, right? So what I'll let Julia do is I'll let her sort of tell us about her experience in the field of VR. What are the fun and amazing things that she's doing? She's the CEO of Novaby, so what are the fun and amazing things she's doing there? So I'll turn it over to you, Julia.
And I was just cracking up a little bit about the Niantic video there that they have at the bottom, standard AR. And I'm like, that is not standard AR, what you're seeing. They have dynamic occlusion in that, which is like still like just really unheard of, or we're all waiting for it to come out into the open and public. So anyway, well, hello, everybody. Nice to be here tonight. This is a treat, actually, to be talking with you all. I used to live in the Bay Area. I am now based in Seattle. So, but I'm still very, very connected with projects and people and organizations down there. And much of my team actually lives in the Bay Area. That's where our company got our start. So as Pawan said, my name is Julia Beabout. I'm the CEO and creative director of Novaby. We are a digital art production company, and we specialize in augmented reality, in particular, what we call augmented reality placemaking, space activations, or tours. So we're really working kind of like in outdoor world scale augmented reality, which is kind of its own animal in a way. And before you all joined us, we were talking about how augmented reality is really, it's a huge, just broad field. There's use cases for almost every single situation. And so, people are really thinking about augmented reality in the general sense as being, kind of like a new web. So you really kind of have to narrow down what type of use cases you're talking about. So Pawan started with a little bit of primer. I know we've got a really sharp group here, so excuse me if I'm not trying to talk down to anybody, and I'm happy to accelerate ahead, skip around. Feel free to interrupt. I'm trying to get, oh, there it is. Okay. So I think the first thing is just to get on the same page with terminology. because augmented reality and virtual reality, mixed reality are very rapid evolving fields, new fields, the terminology is kind of all over the map. So a lot of, if you ask somebody what augmented reality is, your answer can depend a lot on what they think it is and what industry they're operating in. So for us, when we say augmented reality, we are really referring to mobile phone, smartphone based augmented reality, which is the insertion of digital objects into your real world surroundings. Obviously, I think everybody's very clear on virtual reality, which is, fully simulated environment, headset, you're in there, you can't see the outside world. Where it gets a little bit fuzzy is mixed reality. And so we use that term, and many other people do too, to mean headset-based augmented reality. MR, mixed reality and augmented reality, though, are like rapidly converging as the capabilities of smartphones evolve. And also as there's other kind of software technology improvements that are coming on too that we'll talk about at the end that are causing these two fields to converge. But as a real quick, the difference between, say, a HoloLens and a Magic Leap is that they are 3D mapping your environment in real time. And so they have enough processing power and enough cameras on their device to really track where things are going. So if, for instance, this block you see in the MR, if you moved that block to the edge of the table, it would fall off that table just like it would in real life. In mobile phones, that's not the case right now. But like I said, these are rapidly converging. So most of the people, when they think of augmented reality, they think of social media, and that's really kind of the grandbaby or grandfather, I guess, a lot of this. So mobile phone based, a lot of what we call selfie facing, rear facing camera applications there, both interactive and not. But this area is rapidly evolving too. So the number of, I would say, commerce type of use cases that big brands are now using is really exploding. We've seen a huge increase, in particular over the last year, in makeup. So brands like L'Oreal and NYX, that type of thing, are really going heavy into using augmented reality for kind of brand awareness. Frequently that's done through social media platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and Snapchat is how they're reaching people and using those embedded augmented reality platforms. But then there's other folks, eyeglasses are, just such an excellent use case for augmented reality. I'm sure you've been seeing the Warby Parker commercials lately. And so they have their own app to do that as opposed to social media. So it just depends on the use case. And obviously the makeup is very much of a marketing thing, whereas the Warby Parker is very much of a marketing, but it's functional, right? It has a performance factor associated with it. And then there's just, infinite number of enterprise use cases, both in mobile phone, tablet, headset-based, everything. So navigation is something that Google is obviously going very heavily into. Education in the bottom right-hand corner has been a big area for augmented reality and virtual reality for a number of years. Again, Google is very prominent in that with their whole expeditions format or content library. And then architecture and engineering, which is kind of my previous life, it's really, going strong in there. VR is still kind of the king there as opposed to augmented reality. And we can get into some of those reasons later, but there's a lot of people, including us, who have been operating in that arena. And, everybody sees the potential there for it. It's just a matter of the technology catching up to the use case, really. And then repairs or any kind of manufacturing enterprise type of use case. Obviously, there are a lot of examples there. Most of what I've been seeing there is like basically delivering information at a location-based and a timely location-based situation. And
So,
then healthcare
just
as well.
sort of to interrupt you there.
Sure.
One question I have is, so there's a difference between the processing power of a mobile phone and a tablet and a VR headset, and a like sort of mixed reality headset, right?
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about like how that plays into designing these apps and tools?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. So I'll say we haven't really done headset-based in MR. That's just not a sector we focus on, and that is largely they are mostly focused on enterprise use cases, like we see, particularly I would say manufacturing. I think, and what was really telling to me was Magic Leap. Gosh, was it a year ago, 2 years ago? Time has just, been such a blur that, Magic Leap pivoted really from kind of focusing on games and entertainment to enterprise. So I think that really says a lot. One is the price tag associated with the headsets. But, they, like you said, they have their battery packs. That I would say is one of the main things to keep in mind is AR really chews through battery. And so that is our main limiting factor right now with mobile phone. So because really what's happening, at least with mobile phone based AR, is you're seeing your world, but what's really happening is it's your video, your camera feeding a video feed of what you're seeing into the background and inserting the digital objects on that.
I see.
So it's like streaming a movie, or showing a movie on your phone for an hour. So you run out of battery, pretty quickly. There's also a lot more intelligence that can be done with a headset base. So like I said, with this, like it's really mapping your environment real time. With the mobile phone, there's definitely exceptions to very localized mapping, but overall that's not happening, right? So it's really, it's tracking where you are, but it doesn't have an intelligence in terms of really understanding the space around you.
It cannot measure distances in many ways, right?
Well, it's tracking them, but not necessarily measuring them. So what's being used in both of these is what's called simultaneous location and mapping, localization and mapping. And I was going to put a slide in here about that, and I didn't. I'm not a hardware person. I'm in the design category. And like I said, in my previous life, I was in architectural engineering, but I was squarely in application engineering. So but anyway, so that's the main, that's basically AR and MR are a combination of computer vision, which generally involves, like for the selfies, some sort of machine learning with anchoring of points, and combining that with the simultaneous localization and mapping, which basically says, like once you, and that's where the AI part really comes in, but we don't really talk about it as AI, but it is. Those are just not terms that we tend to use about what we do. Anyway, so so basically for mobile phone, that's kind of the key difference between the headset and the mobile phone. So for mobile phone, once it locates where you are relative to my computer screen, right? Okay. Then it can start using the SLAM tracking, assuming you have that feature installed or have used that feature in your application, which you don't necessarily have to, but it greatly enhances the capabilities. Then I can move around, and it's basically realizing kind of where I was to where I started, right? Okay. Whereas with the headset based, like it's actually mapping your room. So there would be a full, right. So that this diagram here is actually pretty accurate, like the sense of what's happening. So it knows you're on this side of the room as opposed to that side of the room. And so you can do a lot more sophisticated things here. Once in that type of thing, you can work a lot with occlusion. So basically there's an understanding that I'm on this side of the table now, and now I'm over there. And if something is over there on the floor, I shouldn't be able to see it.
Yeah.
Right. Just like you would in real life. And so it with MR and it can do that. With mobile phones, that is still very challenging. We definitely have occlusion, but you kind of have to plan for it with that. So does that help? Did I answer that?
So actually, this is actually a very important point, because I think without AI, like without computer vision and sort of deep learning, and all the sort of, like I've seen, of course, like I've played around or I've implemented, object localization algorithms. And one of the important points is that those are sort of the core algorithms that I'm sure go into these sorts of AR applications, because the ability to really pick an object, really to be able to identify and segment parts of an image become really important. And that I'm sure plays into depth perception, and essentially just finding like the center of that object. Right?
Yeah, and I will say, so the way the terms that are frequently used amongst our community are, spatial computing. And I actually take a bit of an issue with that, depending on what technology you're talking about, because I would say, this is just my own personal opinion and experience working with these technologies, is in mixed reality with so headset based, yes, it's really, you're really working with a 3D map, right? With mobile, you may or may not be. And it's, to me, like what's much more important in mobile AR is computer vision, because it's really what's happening. Like the conceptual framework, I had to get my brain around this, especially, like I said, coming from my previous background, where we're used to operating much more like with the mixed reality. Like we're used to working virtually in 3D space, and VR, you're working in 3D space. And so there's a sense of there being a reality to the space. What's really a better paradigm, and this isn't as sexy, but for mobile AR is, I say it's like real-time photoshopping, right? So it's really so the computer vision, I find, is much more important in mobile AR than as opposed to the spatial computing. And so it's really about it recognizing the image that you're seeing, inserting the object, and then the spatial computing comes in about when I move around.
I see.
But I would say it has a lot more to do. The reason it's more challenging in some ways with mobile is you just don't have a sophisticated equipment. So you're trying to do equally challenging stuff with much simpler tools. But it has a lot more to do with human perception, because ultimately you're delivering a rendered image to them on their phone. So it's a little bit different that way. Sorry, my computer is not advancing here. Okay. So like we talked about that. So where we're operating a lot is in what we call placemaking or outdoor world scale AR, very location specific, site specific installations. It really comes out of kind of the public art urbanism arena. I don't know if that's something you guys are into. I can kind of go fast through this area.
This is really awesome. So before we jump in, I have a couple of questions from the audience. I just want to bring that up so that we can, because I think this is really awesome.
Okay, that is a really good one.
The first question is, what is your view on web AR versus app AR? It could be challenging to ask users to install new apps.
Right. Really good question. And so I would say it depends on your use case, right? So right now, for what we're doing, the type of experiences we're doing, well, I'll get into that. We look at both of these technologies every time we start a new project, because the technology and the capabilities of each are just changing so quickly, right? So what we could do what we can do today, we couldn't do a few months ago, right?
Yep.
So you just gotta always be looking at it. Right now, the last project we looked at a web AR solution for, it just didn't have the performance. The frame rate was not sufficient for what we needed. We were kind of getting content hopping around and whatnot. But I just saw an app right before I was on here that I was like, oh, well, that's very similar to what we were doing. And they're using eighth wall for that. So again, like just in a matter of this short of time, it can change. And they just, we use a lot of a combination for what we're doing of marker-based AR in conjunction with SLAM. And so they just, in the last few months, like in December, kind of had that combination available.
I see.
Most people feel that web AR is the future. I certainly agree, hope so. There's definitely psychological barriers to people downloading apps. But again, it really depends on what the person is doing, what the use case is. So web AR is particularly strong for the marketing use case, right? So like if you're walking through a store, right? And if you're walking through Abercrombie and Fitch or whatever, or the Disney store, right? And they want to have an AR experience for there. You're definitely not going to want to download an app for that, right? You're just going to want to be able to scan something and see what's going on. But for the types of things we're doing, which are, kind of longer engaged experiences with very rich, heavy 3D content and interactions, it's like taking people on a tour or going to an event or a performance. And so people come to it with a different mindset. They're coming to it as an event or performance, which they're already predisposed to have to buy a ticket for something similar in the real world. So there's we haven't found it to be a challenge so far. And the capabilities that we have with app-based AR are still much more robust than what we have for web AR.
That makes sense.
It's about finding the alignment between the two. But that being said, I'm hearing web AR is going to be drastically different a few months from now. So we'll be looking at it again. The reality is right now, again, it's really a psychological difference for the user, because when we looked at it in December, like for this experience we were creating, like a downtown holiday experience, there were literally the exact same number of steps between the user and the content in web AR and app-based AR. Now those steps are a little different, but it's not like it was any faster or different. So it's really a psychological thing.
So I do have a couple of other questions, but I'll let you sort of proceed because I want to.
Sure.
Yeah, we want to make sure that you get the chance to.
No, that's fine. I'm happy to do either. So like I said, we're working. I think I'll frame this for you guys. Like I said, what we're doing is placemaking, which is very much involved with engaging the community and helping to create the content, at least the ideas for the content. So a place is defined as a space that has meaning to people. So it's a very human-centered type of approach, very design-centered type of approach. My keyboard is just not cooperating here. There's been a lot of placemaking going on this year. It's something we do very naturally. And so a lot of the protests that we've been seeing, a lot of the organic art that we've been seeing is actual real-world placemaking. So some of you might be, and we've been even seeing some going on virtually. This is a super cool project. We were not involved in this project, but I encourage people to check it out. It's a web-based, what I would call placemaking project. But anyway, so this is a way that we work with communities to help them use augmented reality, or help work with them to create augmented realities that kind of elevate and link to the culture and meaning that they have, very family-friendly types of experiences, very interactive, and that generally make people, bring people joy, make them happy. This is a growing area of interest to governments and cities and what are called business improvement districts, because basically when people attach more meaning and significance to their surroundings and they feel a sense of ownership to them, they generally behave better in those spaces. So, and crime tends to go down, it improves the economy. So there's a lot of social benefit to engaging the public in placemaking. In terms of the tech, what's cool about this is, like I said, this is outdoor world scale AR, and most people kind of began their AR journeys, whether that's in tech or design or hardware or software or design, is they began in more the social media end, and they're maybe moving towards this outdoor world scale. And we just went out there. So that's where we started, and actually have kind of come back. So we've developed a lot of experience and lessons learned working in outdoor world scale AR. And it's one of those things that's kind of easy in theory, but difficult in practice. And that's where I was saying is like, I kind of came up, I approached, this was kind of our first really large scale project. This is a block scale project we did in downtown Seattle. It's still active. But I kind of approached it with my traditional 3D background, right? Like that this is a spatial computing problem. And through the practice, I very quickly, or not eventually came to the conclusion that this is a computer vision problem, because our perception is so sophisticated, and our eyesight is so sensitive to light and reality and depth and all of these things. And so we did this project, it was crazy, in like 6 weeks, and I had a huge team working on this. So just thank you. It takes a village to create these projects. So I don't want to steal anybody's glory. It was a huge team effort. But so we spent a lot of time at the beginning, like trying to get those banners, as an example, like where they're supposed to be on the building. And then we would go to another spot and look at them, and they'd be in a different spot. And you're just like, why? Like, right. We made a 3D map of the building, of the whole block. You know, we've got tons of modelers. So we tried to use an out of the box map from Mapbox, but it was just really off. And so we ended up creating our own 3D map, which was very accurate, but even with that. And so that's kind of where I really began to realize, like, this is about where we perceive those banners to be, not where they actually are. So
the point here is that if it's not done in the right way, it's basically immersion breaking, right? Like,
right. Yeah. It's disappointing, I would say, for people. You know, I mean, that's a better way to think about it. And I that's a really good segue. So, you know, the way we think, and I think the way we think about immersive design is very different than like VR, right? So obviously VR, you have a full simulated environment. And I think of VR more as like, and it's closer to like a movie, right? Where you're really controlling everything. I mean, they have freedom of choice in there in most VR experiences, but you're guiding them, right? You have all the tools at your disposal. When you're on the street, right, there's tons of distractions going on. You've got safety to worry about. You've got a lot of noises. So to me, it's more, it takes a much more willing participant. But, you know, in our opinion, it's equally immersive, but the type of immersion is different. So I think of it more kind of like a play or reading a book, that I think most people, when they're reading a book, find they're completely engrossed in the book, but it's the reason it's so immersive to them and they're tuning out the rest of the words because it's engaging your imagination. And so I would say that with AR, at least the way we are doing it, like, we like that. Like we're trying to engage their imagination with it, right? And so it's not fully explicit. We're asking them to fill in the gaps, and that's what we think is fun. Some other designers might not think that's fun, but so far we've gotten good response. But it's kind of that selective it's that selection of elements that you're giving them.
Yeah.
So in this experience, all of these, I assume you can see my cursor.
Yeah.
All of these, what we call AR tattoos, were interactive. And so each one kind of contained audio visual stories about, in this case, this building that it's on, about the past, present, and future. And so you have some examples over here, like they would tap or swipe that AR tattoo, and you would get those visuals delivered into the screen of your phone, along with some fun audio talking about it and music.
Wow,
so it's fun. And you can see, like, these banners obviously are inspired by a historic photograph of this building in 1918. So we were, this is a block that's very underappreciated and has many challenges in Seattle. And so we were trying to get the community, particularly those that lived here, to appreciate the heritage of and remember kind of happier times on the block. So one of the things we did learn on this, again, as we were doing it, is we kind of assumed we would be delivering everything in AR, so like these assets, right? But what we found is like that wasn't very comfortable for people, and it was also a little bit harder to see. So we balance, basically, we're very selective about what we put in AR and what we deliver into your phone. There's just, so as part of this project, and again, this gets to that kind of architectural engineering use case, there was a large skyscraper going up on the back of the block I just showed you. And so it was very contentious, and still is very contentious in the neighborhood. And the developer process and design review process that all cities have these days was not very transparent and not very equitable in terms of people being able to get to City Hall to express their opinions. And anyway, so we visualized the skyscraper in AR so that people could get a better idea of the magnitude and scale. Full confession, this one is photoshopped, right? Like, it's put in there. So the things that are kind of the challenges we have today is this level of accuracy is still very hard. We were able to get close, but that's a limitation of the technology right now. So, but it definitely worked in terms of getting the scale, helping people understand. So the goals that we set out for we were able to achieve those with the technology in its current state. So we were pleased. We got good feedback. Most people, we did some surveys, follow-up surveys, as well as in-person surveys, and most people felt that this was a great way to learn about a new neighborhood and experience a new neighborhood. So we got way more positive feedback than we expected. So that was nice.
So imagine if you move into a new neighborhood and then you can do this anywhere, right?
Right.
You can just, people do walk around with their phones. You might as well just like put it out there and just see what would happen, right? So
well,
I can imagine
I think within, most people are feeling within a couple of years that will be the case. This is actually in San Francisco. So this same project, basically, we took down the same process and worked with the Boys and Girls Club down there in the Tenderloin to work with the kids to create augmented reality tour for their neighborhood. And that's probably, we were going to launch it last year, but obviously that got a little preempted. So we're hoping this spring or summer we can launch that.
So one question I have is that as you're designing these projects, right? Like what are some of the challenges that users face when they start using these tools?
Yeah, so actually we can talk about this one. This was a holiday experience in downtown Seattle, which so this was app-based. This was the project I was talking about. We did November, December, and looked at web AR again to see. And so some of the challenges are just, AR stuff in general, right? Like as an example, these surfaces in this space were very reflective, which AR does not like, right? Yeah. So I'm just thinking about like, it's the computer vision, right? Is like, I don't know if I mean computer vision folks on here, but it's very much like your own vision, right? When there's a lot of glare,
you cannot recognize depth and you cannot recognize.
Exactly. Yeah. So this was a trickier location. Most of all the other locations were outside. And so we had a lot more, non-glare surfaces, which helped a lot. So, we were concerned about because so by contrast to our other Seattle project I was showing you before, we had volunteers there to help people and engage them the whole bit. And this one was just kind of out there. Right. Yeah. We did train the park staff because there were some stations in the park staff how to use it so they could help people do it. But overall, it was people coming on their own and using it. We did use signage and used real world triggers. And part of that we're so partial to that still is for the reason of the user engagement, just awareness and having something that a person can scan. Like at this point, especially with COVID, everybody knows if they hold their phone to a QR code at this point, something will happen, right? Yeah. We did not use QR codes for this. We used QR codes for the download, but AR does not work well with QR codes. But once we had a QR code on the sign for them to download the app, and then we walked them through, had directions about how to trigger it from the image that was there. We had fun illustrations. Definitely you want to make sure whatever your triggers are, they're integrated to the experience, that they're not extraneous to it. And what we find is people, the first time they're doing it, they're a little nervous, but the learning curve's a little steep, but it's like 2 minutes long, you know? So people get it and we're really, really pleased. It was pretty easy for everybody to use. And we certainly tried to make sure we designed it that way, right? Because we recognize so many people have not used AR before. So that being said, the biggest issue is just user awareness and engagement. And so most of the people that we spoke with knew about the experience ahead of time through the client's social media campaign and came down specifically to do the experience. So there's definitely some self-selection there. We're probably, those people that were self-selecting in are probably more comfortable and confident with their phones and whatnot. But overall, I mean, we had people that had never used AR, and I think what was so surprising to me is we thought our main demographic would be teenagers, right? Traditional Pokemon Go, or the Pokemon Go is about 25 years old. I mean, the demographic's more like 25, but so we thought young, but we had we literally had 70, 75-year-olds coming down specifically to do this and feeling confident enough. I think the fact that it uses people's mobile phones and they feel they're familiar with those already. They feel I can do this.
I think I know why. I think that generation is the Star Trek generation. So,
maybe that's it.
Okay. They kind of knew that, they were like, holy, wow, this is we're able to experience this stuff in our lifetime.
In your lifetime. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah. So we were really pleased with the age range was much broader than we expected. So, okay. Well, I think I'll just go ahead. Yeah. This was my favorite installation we did. That was obviously part of the same experience because I felt like this really showcased the power of AR. So we had 5 different stations where we had 3D content and kind of larger than life, and just with the client's budget and the schedule that we were working on and everything like that, there weren't really a lot of interactions with it. And so it was mostly a selfie opportunities. Although most of the people that interacted, or the people that we spoke to that interacted with it, said they felt like it was a game, even though there was no true interactions by our definition, because it's like, somebody has to take the picture of you with the content. So you're telling them where to go. And so there is a little bit of, it makes it a very much of a fun interaction for people, even though there's not any triggered interactions. Yeah. But anyway, this one was my favorite because it was a forest of Christmas trees. And so you could actually, once it popped up, you could walk all through the forest. And so that to me was just really showcased the power of AR to people. Yeah. So anyway, and then like I said, we're doing tour projects, which, the differences between these things are blurry. And AR is definitely blurring the difference between space activations, placemaking tours, all of these things, know. So this is actually a tour project we're working on with the Richmond Public Schools in Richmond on Monument Avenue. And so for here, we're able to do things like this statue off to the right is called Rumors of War by Kehinde Wiley, world famous artist, painted Obama's portrait, that whole bit. And he created this statue as an example to be in visual conversation with a statue that used to be at the other end of Monument Avenue. Okay. And that was Jeb Stuart's statue. But all of those statues came down this summer, except for Lee, which fingers crossed that will still come down. But so suddenly that statue was gone, right? Like that was in context. And so we're recreating the statue actually and placing it adjacent to his statue, so people can actually put it in visual conversation more with the way he intended it. So those are the kind of things that like really there is no other way to do that in AR. And I think that those are kind of exciting things.
So have you done anything? So one of the questions that's come up is, have you done anything in the education sector with AR? Like, or do you think, can you talk about a few examples where we can use AR in education?
Yeah. So this I would put in that. So our target audience for this experience that we're creating are high school juniors. Yeah. This is like super specific. High school juniors and seniors enrolled in a new history curriculum for Richmond High School. So certainly, although the idea is that it's also simultaneously a public asset for the community, and this is a huge tourist area, so it kind of doubles with both. But so there's a couple ways that we think about AR, that we're using AR in education. I would not say like that's the market we are specifically targeted at, but we, by default, it does engage with that indirectly. So with this as an example, we've actually been involved with using AR as a teaching tool. So like the experience we did with the Boys and Girls Club in the Tenderloin. So those were middle schoolers, so very different level. But we're actually using the creation of the AR experiences, having the kids go through the creation process with us and create whatever components they're interested in and have the abilities to do so, or we teach them. So for instance, they were creating in that situation the art assets and the sound and those kinds of things. So there's a lot of ways to use these as projects that kids or whoever, adults, can plug in whatever way interests them and sparks their passions. In this particular situation, we're going to be having the students that are in this new class create AR monuments, right? So this project is all about monuments, and what are monuments, and why do we have them, and those kinds of things. And so they're really learning to think critically about these things, right? What a year to do it, right? With all the BLM demonstrations, and it's such a focal point issue. So they're going to be designing monuments that then we will build in 3D for them and place them on Monument Avenue for them. Yeah, we're super excited about that. In fact, I just sent the curriculum to them today for that. In terms of more direct applications for education, I feel like I've been seeing a bit more VR for education than AR? I mean, there's definitely both. Sorry, it's just a keyboard here.
So one of the examples that I saw recently was, and I saw this on the Apple Store. I mean, I recently bought this iPad Pro, which also has this LiDAR detector, I think. And one of the examples is like, for example, if you want to operate on the human body, like human anatomy, so they can create like a human sort of on a table, and then you can essentially look at different body parts. Maybe, I don't know, like that's,
yes, right.
It might be a bit gross, but it might be an interesting application in terms of education.
Yeah, definitely. So let's just say, so Google Expeditions has a lot of things like that. So one of the big areas I would say in education has been kind of history, culture, kind of the social studies, I guess, applications, and, you know, doing things like this with pop-up books. Like this is a very, in a sense, old form, amazing, but like old form. It's about as simple of AR as you can get to do something like this. And so there's a lot of things out there like that are bringing books to life. You know, planets are a big thing, like that, you know, you have a book about space, and then obviously you can have an experience. So, and then I've seen sea life things. Again, I feel like I see like VR has moved into education a lot too. So I feel like I see both. And, you know, back when they had the Google Cardboard, that was an option as well.
But I find it sort of funny because I would assume that AR is the more natural option for this, right? Because what you have is people who are like, you know, students who are opening their books and they're working on something. And if you can use AR to sort of augment whatever they're learning through either a textbook or in the classroom, it's much nicer to have that through AR rather than through VR, where
yes. Right. And there's certainly a cost factor there. I mean, I think that especially for schools, they usually don't have a lot of money. And so, you know, the fact that it can use, and these days with COVID, I mean, you know, that's been one of the big boons for AR is like, it's pretty COVID safe because people can use their own equipment. So yes, absolutely. And, you know, using Chromebooks and, you know, tablets and all of that. And so I think to me, like the thing to focus on there is it's very easy for AR and I would say VR to be gimmicky, right? And so I think the challenge, and you know, is to make sure you're not just repeating something that they can get on the web or get in their book. Like how can you actually enhance the learning and experience? So to take them to a new level. So like, as you mentioned about the body, right? Like that's a really good use case or solution, right? It's taking them beyond what they can get in their book. So that's really how we approach our projects too. So like even here, like, right, like we selectively chose to create this marquee, right? Because it's gone, it's a certain stage. And so, you know, being thoughtful, you know, about what you do in AR that they can't get any other way, right? So, so that's this project. We're doing some similar things about having them basically walking like a mile and a half and taking them through really contextualizing kind of why these statues were there and everything. So this is a super exciting project. I'm a history buff, culture buff, so really exciting for me. Anyway, so kind of getting to your question of AR experience design principles, obviously safety is number one. We thought that would be a bigger issue than it has been. So obviously you want to be careful about where you're putting these things, particularly here, right? Like you have to watch about traffic for trip hazards. But we really thought, you know, the reality is people are already playing Pokemon Go all these places anyway. And so, you know, people, I don't want to minimize it, but people are pretty aware at this point. So I think the bigger challenge is accessibility with AR. So I think everybody's still trying to figure that out. Physical accessibility is not too big of a challenge. So, and something we're all used to dealing with. So if most of these sidewalks are going to be wheelchair accessible, right? Yeah. So as long as you're staying to publicly accessible pathways, you're going to be pretty safe about making it safe, and then accessible to everybody. But here we want to put the AR monuments we were talking about on this circle, but okay, well, if you're in a wheelchair, that's going to be kind of tough. So, how do you balance those things? And then also, for blind and deaf, how do we make these experiences accessible for them? And so those are challenges that we're kind of dealing with now. I think that dealing with hearing impaired is a bit easier because you can always put closed caption or a script. Dealing with visually impaired is a bit harder when you're trying to give them an audio experience.
So this kind of leads me to one of the questions that was asked, that what about the data, right? So when you talk about of course, safety, which is the physical safety, but even the data that is actually recorded, right? What happens to that data? Can you get access to that data, or are there any safety regulations with what you do with that data?
Yeah. So in our experience so far, and I'm looking for, if somebody out there has different experience, please let me know. There's not a lot of data to be had, because right now, really our only you have the data that's available to you like any other app in the App Store, right? Your number of downloads, maybe your number of opens, that kind of thing. The challenge, at least with the experiences that we're creating, is there's no way to track the interactions, right? So normally in a normal app, right, you have a button, right? And you can track where they're going exactly and how long they've been there. Those kinds of measurements, to my knowledge, don't exist right now. I think it's a huge opportunity for anybody out there. I don't want to do it. so somebody we need that data to really understand how people are interacting with what we're doing. But because it's not a closed environment like a VR or a game, really the only thing we've been able to do so far is track downloads and do observational type of stuff. Even when we looked at WebXR in December, it was pretty much the same. You could track that somebody scanned the QR code or whatever the trigger was, but beyond that, you're left. So a lot of opportunity there for sure.
So there's sort of no screen recording that gets passed on to
no
cloud or anything like that.
I can't imagine. That's just too much data, I think.
It's just too much data.
AR is so demanding on your phone as it is. I can't imagine also trying to transmit that video feed. Especially upload.
Upload. Probably 5G might change that situation. But even there, I feel that at some level, it will create its own set of privacy issues, I'm sure. I think that was one of the whole issues with Google Glass, right? Was the fact that you could record a video and you could share it, and that became an issue. And I think that's probably where that question comes from, is that if you can do that there, you can do that here. So
you can all so that's how we test and debug, is we just do screen recording, but that's something you can always do and upload to anywhere. So but there's no way on the back end of the App Store for me to get that information, and I can't imagine that they're set up for that right now.
That would be a lot of
a lot of data. So yeah, I don't know. I can talk a little bit about future, what's happening now, or if we want to, I'm certainly happy to look at some other questions. Let's see, with the LiDAR and the latest iPhone, blur the line between your definition of AR and VR. I don't think so. I think it just depends how you're using it. I mean, yeah, that's when these terms are very, subjective, right? Some people feel what we're doing is virtual reality, and to me, like I take a more tech differential between the three, but those are subjective terms right now. Outdoor AR application has huge potential in reconstructing this. Yes, historical monuments. I agree, and bringing them back alive. Have you been involved there? Well, I don't know about bringing them back alive, but there's definitely going. I don't know if you mean by animating those or just recreating them. So that's what we're doing on Monument Avenue. I think you have to be really careful and intentional about that. So as an example, from a design standpoint, and the human factor. So our Monument Avenue project actually, so that's where a lot of the pictures that you saw with the after George Floyd's death were coming from Monument Avenue. So a lot of all that projection art that you saw in the news and everything was on, this is the Lee statue on Lee Circle, which is the other circle I was showing you. And so, these statues are incredibly hurtful for the African-American community and many in the white community as well. These were installed to be intentionally oppressive to these communities. And so, it's the hurt is just so deep. And as I've learned the history of these now, it's truly been utterly shocking. Like, we are not taught. It's way beyond even what you think. And so I've really, personally, I've come to a much deeper understanding of what systemic racism means and is. And so we actually started this project well before COVID. The BLM protests and the whole bit, right? And so our whole goal with that was to add this historical context to these statues so that, it told a more inclusive and fuller story about why they were really there. Well, when the monuments came down, first, that was just shocking that after over 100 years, they've been arguing about taking these down for a long time, but particularly over the last 10 years. And so it was sudden and unexpected that these came down, and, thank God they did. And so we really struggled with, because I'm like, well, we can recreate these in augmented reality and put them, and so we fortunately, we have a steering committee that we're working with on the project that's reflective of the Richmond community. And so, they were like, no. And you can imagine how hurtful that can be. Like, okay, finally, after 100 years, you come down and like, whoop, not so fast, right? So we've been, again, very intentional about the ones we are recreating and what we're doing with them. So as an example, the Jeb Stuart one, that is actually enhancing, it's working with the intention of the artist. It has an educational value to doing this. And so that the community was okay with that. The other one we're recreating now is the Jefferson Davis one, which was actually the first one on Monument Avenue and the only statue that the demonstrators tore down themselves.
I see.
So we're recreating that again because there's an educational context there.
I see.
So I think, that's just something to be, not all statues are equal, and the meanings and significance of them change over time.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the representation matters, like what it
exactly.
Yeah. So we have one last question.
Sure.
This sort of segues into one of the questions I had in mind, was that what kind of team do you need to do all of this, right? Like you're doing some really amazing stuff here. So,
Yeah, and it is a team. It is. I always joke, it takes an AR village. So you need 3D modelers. I mean, a lot depends on the content, right? But you're creating. But in general, we have 3D content in our experiences. We also have 2D content. Okay. So you need a team of artists. You usually need a concept artist. You need a 3D modeler that's pretty senior, depending on, like, this is, as an example, this statue, like, our 3D modeler, our lead 3D artist has an MFA in 3D art and has been doing this for 10 plus years. So this is very advanced to do that. There's many other things you can do. Simply, there's also asset stores out there. CG Trader and Turbo Squid are the big ones. So there's a lot of stuff you can buy.
Okay.
Obviously, we're artists, so we create original content. Then obviously you need a developer. For app-based AR, it really depends what system you're creating in, right? So they're very different developers for these, which is a problem right now. Yeah. So because we work in app-based AR and largely app-based AR, and we tend to use Unity. So you need a Unity developer, right? Yeah. And then they basically publish through Unity an AR Foundation to AR Kit and AR Core. We have done native AR Kit apps too, and that again tends to be a little bit of a different developer, so you kind of have to decide what you're doing up front to get the right developer for the job. And then the other is WebXR is largely JavaScript based. So that's, again, a different type of developer. So you kind of have to make that decision of what is your target device and what is your deployment system you're going to use up front. Obviously you need a UI designer or graphic artist for your UI. You need a UX designer that's, what are we doing? What's the experience? What are the interactions? That kind of thing. So I find there's a lot of, for the UX role, like I end up filling that role a lot myself, depending on what the experience is. I generally act in more of a director role. I would say you need what in the tech world would be called a product manager, but because this isn't an ongoing product, I'm reluctant to use that word. So you need a director, right? Yeah. And so that's generally the role I play, which is, you're managing the product, the team, but you're also establishing the creative vision and the artistic vision for the project. Yeah. So, and you may need multiples of those depending on the scale of the project.
Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. So we're kind of at the end.
Sure.
End of the event because we're a little over time, but So any sort of last words?
Last words. So I will leave you with the future. How about that? First of all, AR is incredibly fun. Obviously I can talk about it for a really long time. So feel free to reach out if you want to continue the conversation. I'm always happy to talk about it. So what is happening now is what's called the AR cloud. So this is really geared towards outdoor world scale AR. And, I think probably a couple years from now, getting to your point earlier, Pawan, that a couple years from now, it will be natural for people to automatically think, what's out here, and pick up, put their phone up or their glasses and check out what's around them. Right now, people aren't thinking that way. But this is a big element to that. We're members of the Open AR Cloud Association. And so we're working as a group along with these providers of AR clouds. These are emerging AR cloud providers to make sure it's a safe, secure AR cloud, that privacy is protected. Certainly Google, Niantic have their own clouds. I think they will, but this one, the idea is that it would be publicly available. And so this doesn't really exist yet. We're working with betas of these because we're part of this, and we have agreements with these folks. So we're kind of pushing the boundaries of what's going on. But I think the technology is amazing and really exciting. So I guess I'll stop there. That's what I'm super excited about, is because what we'll be able to do and create will be really exciting.
Yeah. So thank you for this amazing, informative, great presentation that you had. I learned a lot out of this. Honestly, like there's so many things about augmented reality that of course, there's so many apps, there's so many tools, but when one really starts seeing the kind of applications like around placemaking, around education, around various things, you really start to realize that AR is going to be there in the future in a big, massive way. So thank you so much for this. Sure. I'm sure it's a learning experience for all our attendees. And thanks for the people who attended. So
thank you, everybody. So it's fun. Thank you very, very much for the opportunity to chat with you all. Appreciate it.
Definitely. And I hope to call you back for some other events in the future.
Fun. Great.
Be more than happy to have you. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Alrighty. Bye-bye.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.